about 12:50 here in Washington, D.C. It is Friday. February 12th, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the fact that today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, as well as discuss the sham of justice that we're seeing in the Senate impeachment trial. So I wanted to talk about a few of these things this morning as I sit down to drink my second cup of coffee. But before I begin, as I always do, let me acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the land of the Piscataway. And the Piscataway are the nation that they've lived in these lands, now known as Washington, D.C. They've hunted here, they've fished here, they've farmed here, they've raised their families here and buried their dead here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And they're still here. And I want to acknowledge the Piscataway. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. As most of you know, everyone's been following the impeachment trial, and I'm going to take some time to talk about this a little later in this as I drink my second cup of coffee. I'm actually very excited. I went to one of our local roasters here in DC today, and I got some of my favorite beans. So I'm actually I was looking forward to the second cup of coffee, and I'm really enjoying it this afternoon here. But anyway, I took some time yesterday to watch some of the impeachment hearings. I especially made sure I caught the closing arguments, and I recorded some other of the hearings so I can go back and watch them later. But I wanted just to take a few moments to talk about and reflect on what's happening, as well as reflect on the fact that today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And for those who have followed me for a while, you know that I have a fairly sharp critique about Abraham Lincoln. Our nation holds him up as one of our greatest leaders, one of our greatest presidents. We honor him as a nation tremendously. And yet when you read his writings, when you look at his policies, when you watch what he did throughout his time in office, he was a blatant white supremacist who stated repeatedly that he did not believe Black lives mattered. And he literally ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Colorado, and the Territory of New Mexico from Native nations to make the way for white settlers, as well as Manifest Destiny and the Transcontinental Railway. He was literally one of the most white supremacist and genocidal presidents in our nation's history. And it's deeply troubling that we hold him up as one of our greatest leaders ever. I will be tweeting about this and sharing posts about this on social media. As you know, I've written about this extensively over the past probably 5 to 10 years. There's actually 2 whole chapters in our book, Unsettling Truths, that goes into debunking the mythological legacy of Abraham Lincoln. And I've done blog posts, I've done live streams, I've talked extensively about Abraham Lincoln's mythological legacy. And on Monday, on President's Day, I'm going to be doing another live stream where I will be going through all of the material that I have and just talking extensively about the abhorrent legacy of Abraham Lincoln and the tremendous damage he did to our nation and to peoples of color through the way that he embedded white supremacist policies, institutionalized slavery, and got our country to actually celebrate genocide, which is not only what we do when we celebrate Abraham Lincoln, but it's actually what we do when we celebrate Thanksgiving. So we'll be talking about all of those things much more in depth on Monday. But I just wanted to point out today that today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And we need to use this as a chilling, humbling reminder, not only of who we used to be and who we were as a nation, but of who we are and of what we celebrate. Because it's very troubling what we celebrate and what we hold up as noble and even as heroes. So I wanted to kind of start off by pointing some of that out this morning. Reflecting on the trial, reflecting on what's going on right now. Literally, Trump's lawyers are defending him as I'm speaking. I believe it started about noon today. And the headlines are already saying they're blaming everybody but him, of course. we'll talk about Trump's psyche later. But I want to talk some about just what's happened since this white nationalist, technically Christian terrorist attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, earlier this year, just over a month ago. And for people of color, especially, right, we knew that this was something our nation was very capable of. We knew that conservative white people were highly capable of this, because it's been conservative white people, and it's been white America that's enacted this history for centuries, right? Even when we look at our white heroes, people who we say were progressive, like Abraham Lincoln, he was a blatant white supremacist who did horrible things to Native Americans, who had unbelievably white supremacist views and policies. Even if you look at the District of Columbia Emancipation Act that he signed on April 16th of 1862, right, which was kind of a trial run of his Emancipation Proclamation, which came out in 1863. But in that proclamation in 1862, that was effective only here in the District of Columbia, I believe, he freed the people who were enslaved, but he compensated the slave owners. He compensated the white supremacists who owned other people and forced them into enslavement. And when he freed those people who were enslaved, he compensated, he paid reparations to those white slave owners. $300 per slave, which would have been equal to about $8,000 today. Don't tell me he gave a crap about black lives. No, he cared about white lives, cared about white landowning men. Even his statement hanging at the Lincoln Memorial states, if I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. If I could save by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save by freeing others and leaving some and leaving others alone, I would do that. He literally states he doesn't give a crap about black lives in this process. He's trying to hold this union of white male landowning supremacist men together. And people of color know that. Our BIPOC people understand this. We've seen this. We live this history. So we weren't surprised when this, what everyone else was expecting to be a free speech demonstration on the Capitol on January 6th, instigated by our very white supremacist president, Donald Trump, turned into an insurrection and actually a terrorist attack. This didn't surprise people of color. What was chilling was how law enforcement reacted, right? Not only did they not prepare for this because they couldn't imagine terrorism being enacted by someone who looked white, who looked like them, but then after it was over, they were actually allowing the people to leave the Capitol building and helping them down the stairs. And then they were arresting them, right? And they went back and they were like, oh, we probably should have arrested those people we were helping to leave. And they went out and began arresting them. And we've all heard these stories, right? We've heard the story about Jacob Chansley, who was the QAnon shaman who helped instigate a lot of this and was at the forefront. And after he was put in jail, he demanded to be fed organic food, and he was appeased. The District of Columbia ordered the jail where he was being housed to feed him organic food. There was a story about this in the AP. I'll share this in the comments, the chat here for this live stream, right? But it's really kind of astounding that this man who was a part of an insurrection is now being treated and fed organic food here in our prisons. We also heard the story of Jenny Cudd, right, who was one of these white nationalist terrorists who stormed the Capitol and went inside the building and was arrested. And she, after she was given bail, she requested and received permission from the judge to go on a vacation to Mexico because she had already paid for her travel and she wanted to go on a weekend retreat with her work. And so the judge let a terrorist, someone who was a part of an insurrection, who enacted terror at our Capitol building, the judge allowed her to go on vacation to Mexico. Now, people of color, right? We know this is not the way we are treated by our criminal justice system. We know that had these been people of color acting this way, that this would have been entirely different. The response would have been massively different. And so we know that even now going into this trial, it's a sham. I'm going to share with you something I tweeted yesterday about this impeachment trial, where I said 100 mostly white and male extremely partisan senators are trying to act as impartial jurors in the trial of a white landowning male who's the former president, who incited a white Christian nationalist terror attack on our nation's capital. And the most severe punishment on the table is that he might not be allowed to run again. And this pretty much sums up what justice looks like for white people here in America. Right? When we have a Declaration of Independence that calls natives savages, when we have a constitution that was written to protect white landowning men, when we have a doctrine of discovery and white supremacy being embedded in our foundations and institutionalized throughout our nation's history, our nation's institutions, this is what justice looks like when you're a part of that majority group, which is, it's not justice. And so right now, the nation is hanging, waiting for justice to be served. But even if the most improbable thing happens, which is 17 senators choose to vote. I'm not even call this isn't a jury. This is, they're voting. And they choose to vote with the Democrats. And Trump gets convicted. The result of that will be a political slap on the hand. He will not be allowed to run again. That's it. This is what we are waiting for. This is the justice we are being told that we should hope for. And this is where it just becomes kind of unbelievable. There was an article in King TV, which is an NBC affiliate out of Seattle. And they did an article about the difference between an impeachment conviction and a criminal conviction. And they said, while the impeachment process shares a lot of vocabulary with the criminal trials many of us are used to, that's about where the similarities end. They said this trial results in either acquittal or conviction. The conviction simply means that the person is removed from office and potentially, if the Senate also decides, becomes ineligible for future federal office. That's what we're going to be told justice is going to look like. Even in their closing arguments yesterday, the impeachment managers stated this isn't about punishment. This is about prevention. We're not trying to hold this man accountable. We're trying to prevent him from doing future damage, which needs to be done. But let's not pretend. Let's not tell ourselves that this is justice in any way, shape, or form. First of all, if this was just, if this was a trial truly focused on doing the just thing, none of these senators, right? All 100 of them, both Democrats and Republicans, would ever be allowed to serve as jurors. Period. They would never be allowed. They were the victims. They were the ones who were fearing for their lives as Trump's supporters came in and terrorized our nation's capital. they would never be allowed to be on a jury because they're not impartial. They're not impartial. I'm going to share this King TV article with you. I'll put this also in the chat, so you can read that. It was a pretty interesting article, and it helps really clarify the difference between what's going on in the Senate right now and what happens in the criminal court. And this morning in The Hill, the news publication The Hill, they reported that a group of GOP senators met with former President Trump's legal team yesterday, on Thursday, to discuss strategy as they prepared to present their opening arguments in the impeachment trial. Senators Ted Cruz from Texas, Mike Lee from Utah, and Lindsey Graham from South Carolina were spotted entering the meeting, which took place in a room near the Senate chamber that Trump's team is using as a workspace. Cruz told reporters after the meeting that they were talking strategy for the defense opening argument on Friday. We were discussing their legal strategy and sharing our thoughts, Cruz said. Asked to elaborate, Cruz added that they were talking in terms of where the argument was and where to go. And this is a man who's a juror. And he's literally talking strategy with the leaders, the lawyers for Donald Trump. And he's supposed to be a juror. It's very, very clear that this trial is a sham. And it's on both sides, right? I'm not saying that the Democrats are impartial. No, they're not partial. They are highly politically motivated. This thing's a sham. I'll share this article with you from The Hill. I'll put it into the chat as well, because I think these are things we have to be aware of, right? And so we're being told by the mainstream media that we need to fight for justice. We need to hope for justice. We have to hold President Trump accountable. We have to demand justice. There's no justice. Even if he gets convicted, which is beyond the shadow of it, is most probably not going to happen, right? Because right after they were sworn in as jurors, the Senate held a vote asking themselves, is this constitutional? And it was only like 55 or 56 senators agreed it was constitutional, which is not enough to convict. So there's 45 senators who are sitting there, and I'm not even going to pretend that they're listening, who are sitting there just waiting to raise their hand and say, yeah, this is not a constitutional trial. So even if, against all probability, somehow 17 Republican senators decide to vote with the Democrats, even if they convict Trump, it's a slap on the hand. He's told maybe he would be removed from office. Then they have to vote again, apparently, that to say, okay, now we're going to actually not only convict you, but we're going to rule that you are not allowed to run for office again. This is politics. And we're being told to wait for justice, but even in the best of circumstances, justice will absolutely not be served here. As I said earlier, I watched the closing arguments of the Democratic House Impeachment Managers yesterday. And Representative Jamie Raskin delivered the closing arguments. And early in his presentation, he appealed to, again, the most unifying theme in American politics, which is American exceptionalism. And he talked about how fragile democracy is globally. And that for most of the world's history, leaders were founded on injustice. It was despots and dictators and cowards, and he used a lot of very strong languages of who had been leaders throughout history before the rise of democracy. And then he talked about how this nation was founded on a Declaration of Independence that declares all people to be equal. And he did the exact same thing which Joe Biden does, which is he misquoted the Declaration of Independence. Joe Biden likes to say the Declaration of Independence says we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. Representative Jamie Raskin said that the Declaration declares everybody equal. It doesn't. First of all, it doesn't say women. It says all men are created equal. And then 30 lines later, in the Declaration, it refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. The Founding Fathers didn't give a damn about Native peoples. We were merely an obstacle to their manifest destiny, to their claiming these as their promised lands, to their claiming discovery over these empty Indian lands that were west of the Appalachian Mountains, which mean old King George said they couldn't have the right of discovery there. The Founding Fathers didn't give a damn about Native peoples. They didn't even consider us human. We were savages. So please, please, please do not continue perpetuating the lie that the Declaration of Independence was meant to advocate for the humanity of all people. It wasn't. It was advocating for the humanity, for the agency of white landowning men, period. And then Representative Raskin went on to quote Abraham Lincoln, where he said, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And again, I actually have an analysis of this speech given by Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln quotes the Constitution. He refers to the Declaration of Independence, and he uses this language of people. However, just like the Constitution does, he has a very narrow definition of people. And this comes from Lincoln's broader life, which I already talked about, and we'll talk more about over the weekend. Abraham Lincoln did not believe people meant those formerly enslaved. Abraham Lincoln did not believe people meant Native peoples, those indigenous to these lands. He didn't believe that. He was actively, as he was giving these speeches, he was actively committing genocide and ethnically cleansing Native peoples to make way for the Transcontinental Railway. When Abraham Lincoln says a government of the people, by the people, for the people, he literally means, just like the Constitution, white landowning men. And Jamie Raskin chose to hold him up, to quote him. I want to share with you this article I found about the District of Columbia Emancipation Act, which was signed by Abraham Lincoln on April 16th of 1862. And I encourage you to read it, because it literally pays reparations, not to those who were enslaved, but to their owners for their loss of income. But Representative Raskin continued on in his mythology, stating that the Declaration of Independence stands for equality for all, and that this makes the United States of America the envy of the world. And then he went on to talk about our Constitution. He talked about our preamble, which begins with these beautiful words of "we the people." And it lays out this statement of promise of what we can become as a nation. And then he goes on and says, in Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress is created, this popular body elected by the people, it's created. And then he says, and in Section 8, they are given the power to regulate, to declare war, to govern, and to even hold accountable. He skipped Section 2. Because Article 1, Section 2 is not nearly as inclusive as this mythological narrative that Representative Raskin was trying to portray here. And you can't just jump to Article 8 until you read Section 2. Or you can't jump to Section 8 until you read Section 2. And Section 2 never mentions women. Specifically excludes natives. And counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. It still says it today. Go back. I challenge you. Go back and look up the Declaration of Independence. Read Article 1, Section 2. Never mentions women. Specifically excludes natives. Counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. In 1787, that literally left white men. And it was white landowning men who could vote. He then goes on to talk about how Article 2 gives the power of impeachment over the president, and that the oath for the president is in the Constitution. But again, impeachment is not about justice. It's political theater. And what we're having now, even if Donald Trump's already been impeached, but even if he gets convicted, there's no justice here. Yesterday, I tweeted, I said, I'm disappointed that House Impeachment Managers began their closing arguments in Donald Trump's impeachment trial with an appeal to the myth of American exceptionalism, and then extensively quoted one of our nation's most white supremacists and genocidal presidents, Abraham Lincoln. Because Abraham Lincoln's policies and actions included entailed genocide, his words are unable, are disqualified to be used for peace. If you want to unify this country, Democrats, if you want to unify this country, stop quoting Abraham Lincoln. Stop pretending the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence say things they don't actually say. Make the changes necessary to those documents, to the foundations. Quit pretending that's already happened. And quit telling us it's a long journey to equality. It's not. Myself, African Americans, Native peoples, women, LGBTQIA2+, the marginalized peoples oppressed by this nation for centuries, fully understand our own humanity. The reason equality is such a long road, the reason it has to have this moving goalpost that keeps going back and back and back, the reason why we have to go this route slowly is not because the marginalized are not ready to handle the acknowledgement of our humanity. It's because white people are reluctant to give up the understanding and the belief, the lie, that they're superior. That's why the road to equality is so long and so bumpy. Because white people, white landowning men in particular, have a very difficult time acknowledging that they're not superior. This trial is deeply, deeply disappointing. Justice will not be served. Trump will not be held accountable. even in the best of circumstances, that's not going to happen. Because our system was not designed to hold white landowning men accountable and to serve and to give justice to people of color and other marginalized communities. That's not why we have a constitution. And it was troubling that on the Senate floor yesterday, the impeachment managers were trying to reinforce the mythologies of our nation, the lies our country says, to perpetuate systemic racism, white supremacy, and sexism. American exceptionalism is the coping mechanism of a nation that's in deep denial of its genocidal past as well as its current racist and sexist reality. It's not a partisan problem we're facing. This isn't a Donald Trump problem. This isn't even a Republican problem. This is a foundational level problem. It's a bipartisan problem. And we're not going to fix it just by telling Donald Trump he can't run again. We're not going to fix it that way. So, my relatives, this is a lot of information. I want to share that the tweet I shared earlier about the closing arguments. Just put that into the chat there. I'm not trying to be hopeless. I'm not trying to say change can't happen. I'm not trying to say justice will never be served. I'm trying to say if we want those types of things, we have to put our focus and our energy where the problem lies. Donald Trump needs to be held accountable. He should probably be barred from running again. He should also be convicted criminally and probably imprisoned. But that's not, even if that happened, it's not going to fix the problem. We have to deal with our foundations. We have to acknowledge what our documents actually say. We have to quit lying to the masses, to the globe, that this is who we are and this is what we stand for. It's not. It really struck me the other day. It was a report yesterday that President Biden met with the leadership of China, and he pressed them on their treatment of some of their marginalized peoples, and he pressed them on other policies. This is literally while we are having a trial that is about ready to acquit a president who incited an insurrection, a white nationalist terrorist attack against our nation's capital. This is less than a year after we had a public lynching for the globe to see of a black man by our police department. This is months, just a few weeks after we decided that the officers who shot Jacob Blake in the back were not going to be held accountable. Right? And we dare lecture other nations. This is the problem that we have. And we have to deal with it. We have to acknowledge what we're seeing right now, what happened on January 6th. This is who we are. I'm going to go back to my repeated themes. The United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. We need a conversation that's on par with the Truth and the Reconciliation Commissions that happened in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I would not call ours Truth and Reconciliation, though, because that perpetuates the myth that we used to be great and now we're not. No, I would call ours Truth and Conciliation. This nation was founded in a mess. We were founded with systemically racist, sexist, and white supremacist foundations, and we have to address that. This is not about racial reconciliation. This is about racial conciliation. We need a Truth and Conciliation Commission. George Erasmus, the Dene elder, when writing about the TRC in Canada, hit the nail on the head when he used the quote that said, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you have to start by creating common memory. Our nation has no common memory. We can't even quote our documents correctly, and we can read those. We don't know who Abraham Lincoln was. We don't know who our founding fathers were. We don't know the horrors they enacted and the way that they propped up white supremacy and institutionalized it throughout our government. We can't even quote our documents that are written correctly. How the hell are we going to be able to remember our actual history? The United States of America does not have a common memory, and it is absolutely killing us. One of the reasons I wrote this book, my co-author and I, Soong-Chan Rah, one of the reasons we wrote this book, Unsettling Truth, is because we wanted our nation desperately to have a common memory. We wanted to be able to lay out without in a way that people could hear it. We want to lay out, this is our nation's history, and until we can acknowledge and deal with it, we will not be able to move forward. We have 2 chapters in our book debunking the myth of Abraham Lincoln's legacy. We have 2 chapters in our book calling out the white supremacists, policies and actions, the genocidal actions of Abraham Lincoln. We talk about our foundations. We talk about the Declaration of Independence. We talk about trauma. We talk about common memory. We talk about TCC. All of these things are in this book. And I want to share this with you in the chat again. If you want to purchase a copy of this book, they're available on my website. They're also all over. You can get them anywhere. I'm actually excited because this book is selling well, not just on my website, but on Amazon, other places around the country, but it's nowhere near close to my hope for this book, which is that it creates a national dialogue. I wrote this book. Yes, it was published by a Christian publisher. It was published with my co-author is a theological professor. I myself am also follow the Christian faith. But I wrote this book as a critique, actually a rebuke of the church. And I wrote this to be accessible to anybody, no matter what your faith tradition might be. And one of the things I say over and over again is, if you do not understand the history of the church, doesn't matter what your faith tradition is, if you do not understand the history of the Western Christian church, you will never be able to make sense of our nation's history. The myth we say is that there's a separation in America between church and state. That's not true. The church has been behind the scenes, pulling the strings, justifying the injustices, creating the opportunities for the oppression since the founding of this nation. And if you do not understand the heresies that the church has incorporated into its theologies, you will never be able to understand the oppression, the injustices enacted by our nation. Doesn't matter what your faith tradition is. If you own land, if you enjoy benefits of this country, you are benefiting from heretical doctrines founded in the Christian church and embedded into the foundations of our nation. So I want the nation to read this book. I want the nation to hear this critique and even the flat out rebuke that this book is for the Western Christian church. We have to learn how to deal with these things. And so I'm grateful at how well the book is doing, but it's nowhere near the national dialogue that I want it to be. And I'm hoping that we're able to get to a point where we can see the necessity, not only of addressing this history, but of addressing the heresies that this nation was founded on, so that we can find a way to move forward better. I know I went long today, but there's so much to talk about. On Monday, I'm going to be doing a live stream where I specifically look at the mythological legacy of Abraham Lincoln, and I'm going to spend probably close to an hour deconstructing that and pointing out all of the things that are challenging. I'm also going to, over the weekend, continue tweeting and putting on social media resources that I've already written and produced and stuff around Abraham Lincoln. Today is his birthday. Monday is President's Day, which we also use to honor him. And I am absolutely convinced that we should not honor this man. We absolutely should not be honoring Abraham Lincoln. His legacy is so horrific to people of color that the fact that we honor him is, on one hand, it's astounding. On the other hand, it's not surprising. But we should not, if we want to be a nation that has integrity in advocating for justice, racial conciliation, equality, Abraham Lincoln would probably be the last president we would think of honoring. So anyway, I know this is a lot, but I can't have my relatives walk in beauty. And may we learn how to walk in beauty together. And Hakonet.